Can I put it on?
Call the special meeting of USD 417 Board of Education to order. We do have a waiver of notice that those of us in the room will sign. Those of you on Zoom, we will need you to get an electronic signature, and those will be sent out by Amber. The first item on our agenda this evening is approval of our agenda, which includes the fiscal year 2022-2023 audit and the transportation handbook.
I'm letting Patty on now.
Okay.
Patty, can you hear me, and can you show us who you are real quick too, please? Perfect, thank you.
That's great, thank you.
So moved.
All right,
Second.
it's been moved by Terry, seconded by Donnie for approval of the agenda. Our first item is the fiscal year 2022, I'm sorry, all in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Our fiscal audit, Cindy Jensen, you are up.
Okay, we'll make it short and easy for y'all. Okay, so I should have brought more hard copies. I think she
No, we're good.
emailed them.
We're good.
There was a letter called governance. It's one we're required to give you by standards. I'm gonna mostly let you read it at your leisure. Talks about the audit process, didn't have any problems with anybody at all. Went well. There's also, part of that, there's adjusting journal entries. State of Kansas has a pretty conservative basis of accounting. Receipts aren't receipts until they hit your hand. Doesn't matter if Terry says, I'm gonna give you $50,000 until he gives you the $50,000, it doesn't count. Expenses are expenses when you incur them.
Yeah.
So if you order it in June, but you don't pay for it until July, it is an expense in June. Most of these entries that I have here, and we've talked about them, are getting it on the right side of the year. So we did make some beginning payable entries and some ending ones as far as that goes. There's also another sheet in there that talks about uncorrected variances. It's not going to be exact. You know, there's going to be little things here or there. So, but we do have to quantify those. So that extra sheet is some of that where, you know, it's off a little bit, but it doesn't, shouldn't say it doesn't really matter. It's not going to be the end of the world for any of that. We had some adjustments or unadjusted things for some reimbursed expenses. We've talked about that. The state's funny, you get more budget credit for an expense that is reimbursed to you. The catch is that expense and the reimbursement have to happen in the same year. So you just have to be careful because you don't get the extra budget if the expense was incurred last year and they reimbursed you this year, if that makes sense. So most entities, it doesn't make a difference, but in a school district, it kind of does. So you don't want to put that into the general fund. The actual audit report itself is attached. It's on page 1. It's on your financial statements on a regulatory basis of accounting, your budget basis of accounting. It's an unqualified opinion on that, or unmodified, which always sounds terrible, but actually unmodified is what you want. So it's also an opinion on your federal compliance. That is also an unmodified opinion. Page 4 is your snapshot in the book of all of your funds, where they started, where they ended the year. Beyond that, your notes to the financial statement. I'm not sure that you care a whole bunch about those. On page 7, there was statutory violations. I think there was a lot about bids last year. That problem occurred throughout the year, but then it was remedied towards the end of the year. So that's why it's in there. There was Also sometimes when your funds exceeded FDIC for periods of time, you get $250,000 for time deposits, $250,000 for demand deposits, and then the banks give you pledges for the rest. It's a good idea. I mean, the bank's looking at it, but you guys should be looking at it too. The bank's not gonna know when you pull down a big ESSER check. So probably if you just give them a heads up and say, hey, we're gonna get tax dollars, or we're gonna draw down more, then they can get you that extra security. At year end, it was fine. We're not 100% certain, but we couldn't figure it out either. One of the statutes talks about buying from the industry of the blind, so deaf and blind, is that right? Yeah. We couldn't find that you made that purchase, so you might buy some trash bags or light bulbs from those folks. The rest of it here, I think is pretty self-explanatory. There is a note on page 11. When we audited the beginning balances, there were some prior year payables that weren't taken into consideration. So there's a prior period adjustment made on that. That was for stuff like your payroll cuts on the 10th. So by force, you have from the 11th to the 30th of unpaid payroll. That by statute is an accounts payable. There was, I don't remember what a bus, you ordered it, it just wasn't here. There was some textbooks, they were ordered, I think they were even invoiced in June. So again, it's not wrong in the totality, it's just when you look at that arbitrary June 30th date, it has to be on the right side of the year. So that's what that prior period adjustment is. On page 14 and beyond, that starts a more detailed presentation of all your funds. It's just like the first page, but there's just more detail in that. I'm not sure if any funds you have concerns about. Then we get to page 35 starts the federal compliance. Because you got more than $750,000, or you spent more than $750,000 of federal aid, we had to go ahead and do some federal procedures. There's a couple reports there about internal control over compliance and the actual compliance itself. I did have one finding. The finding was, I think, in my opinion, you need better controls over compliance. You have people wearing a lot of hats because you're small. And I don't believe if somebody miscodes something, error, whatever, it may not get caught timely. So hopefully the federal money is actually gone on all the COVID things, because the COVID was hard. It's a moving target. They changed the rules like, at whim. So that was hard. But I do believe that you need to use the purchase orders. You need to get training. You need to do everything that you can to try to make sure that when you spend that money, it is in compliance. And I think maybe the board had to respond to that finding, and on page 42, Tina Ray had responded to it, with agreeing with the recommendations and agreeing to do your best with your available resources and personnel to make sure that you do spend money appropriately. That being said, there was no question cost, so that's good, right? It's just the control deficiency. We also had to address your prior year findings, and I kind of just used what the finding was last year, and then there was a big response, so I put all of that on there too. So I think that should be covered. So anyhow, that is actually all I have. No, it was very exciting.
Tell us more.
If you have any questions, let me know. We can do whatever. So anyhow, thank you.
Thank you.
Patty, Jamie, do either one of you have any questions for Cindy?
I do not.
I do not either.
Then at this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the fiscal year 2022-2023 audit as presented.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the fiscal year 2022-2023 audit as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Cindy.
Thanks.
We appreciate it.
Great evening.
Thank you. Transportation handbook is essentially the next 15 pages that are in your packet. We have Matt here. We have Mrs. Meyer online. We have Mr. Esslinger in the room. Are there any questions or concerns about the changes regarding the transportation handbook? Terry, I know you had asked that we table this.
Well, I mean, I think my questions are still out there from last month about some liability issues. Let me preface this by I 100% get why we're changing the policy. I get why the bus drivers are uncomfortable. I 100% understand that. But I do have questions about the liability of putting a parent on the bus, and what happens if that child doesn't get adequately clipped in and something happens. And I know we'll never cover 100% of the risk either. I get that. I just want to make sure that we've kind of thought through that. So those are my outstanding questions.
I will let you know that we did have KSB draft up a release regarding assisting student with transportation, that if the board feels that we would like to have, Amber, can you? I'll hand a hard copy around so you guys can see. And that was drafted by KSB, but it essentially is a release and hold the district harmless agreement that we could have pre-K parents sign.
Well, again, I would throw that back to the people that do this a little bit. You know, if we've thought through this and other districts are doing it and we have answers to those, I had questions. So
Right.
I didn't feel like they got answered at the last meeting, so.
Right. Matt, you wanna?
Well, as far as the parent getting injured, or, like if they tripped on the bus, you'd ask them about that. Our general liability insurance would cover that.
Okay.
Like, that would be the same as tripping in a building. As far as whether the parent buckled and unbuckled them properly, I mean, the driver could make the same mistake. I don't know. I'm not an insurance guy, but.
Right. Well, I guess my question is, as long as you guys have thought through all this and you're comfortable with this.
I think leaving the driver's seat unattended during that time is a lot more risky than a parent buckling their own child.
Okay. And that's
Is my
100% honesty here. That's the comment I wanted to hear made. I wanted to know that all those things have been thought through, all those things have been discussed, and nobody could tell me that the last time we met.
Right.
So that's the questions I was asking, and I appreciate the answers. So as long as all of you guys are perfectly okay with what you brought to us again, I'm fine with that.
And I think, this is gonna be on a very small scale too.
Right.
Like, it's gonna be a handful of kids that possibly even this affects or come
Sure.
into play with. The majority of the kids will be able to handle it, and we've talked about bringing buses over at the start of the year, and just like we practice lining up and doing those type of things, like practicing with those kids and stuff on doing it themselves and stuff and everything. So I think it'll be a very low, small risk. There's always risk, but sure, very small, low risk, because it's gonna be a very low population that this possibly even affects. affects or has to come into play with.
Right, which also then played into my other question of how necessary is transportation for, I mean, if it's a very small number, is the juice worth the squeeze? And right now, we still feel like it is, so that's fine.
Yeah, we don't know, next year, we might have a kid on each bus that needs help, or we may have none.
Sure.
I just think we need something in writing on how we're gonna handle this, so everybody's on the same page and.
Okay.
And I would just say, as we continue to expand our pre-K, we went from an at-risk program to being a community-wide 4-year-old program. And so we've added more kids to our rosters, and the plan down the road is to look into having a 3 and 4-year-old. We want to expand this early childhood program and for the sake of kindergarten readiness. And so we don't really want to take a step backwards in transportation. That we feel like that's a service that we should be providing all of our students if they need it. And working with Bryce the last several years to get to where we could provide transportation for pre-K was a big step for our program. It allowed a lot of kids to attend that couldn't previously attend because that midday piece was tricky, or parents were taking them to daycare before school, and so they couldn't get picked up at daycare. So the transportation piece has helped our program in terms of numbers the last few years.
Okay. Very good.
Patty, Jamie, either one of you have any questions regarding the transportation handbook? Since we have Mrs. Meyer, Mr. Weaver, and Mrs. Brummer, and Mr. Esslinger in the room to answer those questions. Okay. Hearing none, then at this time I would entertain a motion to approve the transportation handbook as presented.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
It's been moved by Terry, seconded by Donnie to approve the transportation handbook as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. With no further items to discuss, we are adjourned, and we look forward to seeing everyone at our regular Board of Education meeting on July the 8th at 6 p.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Remind me to